Hello and welcome to the penultimate event as part of our Planet to Plate Festival celebrating the work of the Institute for Sustainable Food. I'm Professor Duncan Cameron, one of the two co-directors of the Institute, and today it is my absolute pleasure to introduce my good friend and collaborator, Professor Siobhan Lambert-Hurley. Siobhan is a historian and has been working with so many different stakeholders, an absolute giant in interdisciplinary work, and one of the most exciting and interesting collaborations that I've certainly ever had. I never imagined I'd be working with a historian as a natural scientist myself when I started my career in science, but the work we've done together, principally led by Siobhan, has been absolutely phenomenal and eye-opening. So today we're going to hear about Forgotten Food, which is a project that Siobhan has led, focusing on some of the rice varieties and food that now we're struggling to eat and consume, principally or partially as a result of climate change. So I'm not going to go on and steal Siobhan's thunder, but I hope you will enjoy this really exciting programme of performance, of cookery, and of the historical context for why we have done this work. So over to you, Siobhan and the team, and I'll let you introduce the rest of the gang.
Okay, thank you so much for your very generous introduction, Duncan, and I'm so delighted to be here today, and may I say too a very warm welcome to everyone who is joining us today, I hope from around the world. As Duncan said, we're here to participate in the Planet to Plate Festival, which is such a fantastic opportunity to showcase some of the really exciting interdisciplinary work that we do at the Institute for Sustainable Food at the University of Sheffield. So as Duncan said, my name is Siobhan Lambert-Hurley. I'm a professor of global history at Sheffield. I'm a member of the Institute, and I'm also the lead on a large collaborative project called Forgotten Food. And I think this project is such a great one to be talking about today because it really exemplifies what we do at the Institute, and it brings together historians, literary scholars, sociologists, and plant scientists in the US, India, UK, and Canada with just an amazing group of popular historians, oral history specialists, chefs, and writers in India. And you'll see, hopefully you can see my screen, you'll see here that I've just given you some images of some of the kind of main players in this project, though there's many more involved as well. So we're going to be showcasing some of the work of this project in our session today, so over the next couple of hours. And I just thought I'd start by going over our program so you just know what to expect in terms of what's coming up. So I'm going to be starting today with a short talk on resurrecting Tilak Chandan. Here I'm going to be focusing on the history, the culture, and also the science behind growing a type of heritage rice in North India. I'm then going to turn it over to a couple of my collaborators who are going to be doing some cooking demonstrations with our rice, with Tilak Chandan. So first of all, we're going to hear from food writer Dr. Taurana Hossain Khan from Rampur, who is going to cook a dish of really important cultural and religious and cultural and historical significance in Rampur, and that is khichdi. It's then going to be followed by a demonstration by Indian MasterChef finalist Sadaf Hossain from Delhi, who is going to be rounding off our meal with a rice-based dessert, and that is kheer. Now, I'm hoping we should have some time after those two cooking demonstrations to take any questions you may have. So if you have thoughts coming to you as we go along, please feel free to type them in the chat, which is, I believe, under the live feed today. Then in the second half of our session today, probably around 3 o'clock BST, if we're all on schedule, we're going to be featuring a performance of oral storytelling, which is called Rektigoi. And this is going to be drawing on a late 19th century Urdu text by the author Mir Yar Ali Jan Sahib. And this is a text that's fully laden with historic references to food, as it describes a festival that was held by the Nawabs of Rampur, who were the local princely rulers of the time. And this festival that they held in the 19th century was known as the Jashan-e-Benazir, so the incomparable festival. We'll be having that next, and that's going to be introduced by one of my colleagues, the historian, Dr. Razak Khan. We'll then have an opportunity after that performance to speak with many of the participants in that performance. So one will be hearing from scriptwriter Professor Darish Iqbal, and also artists Fawzia Dastango and Sanea, and they will be in conversation with the historian Razak Khan, and they'll also be taking questions from the audience as well. So just to reiterate, if you've got any questions or comments as we go along, for me, for our chefs today, or for our performers or any of the team, please do add them to the chat, and we will try to address them as we go along. So overall, I'm hoping that our event today is going to be a veritable feast of history, cooking, and culture that is going to link forgotten food from India's past to the issue of food sustainability in India now and into the future. So that's our plan for the next 2 hours. I'm going to start, as I said, with my own talk. And my talk, as I mentioned already, is going to be on the theme of resurrecting Tilak Chandan. Now, I thought it was only fair to start today by kind of whetting your appetite. So I'm going to start today by talking about a dish. And that is the dish that I've already mentioned, the dish of khichdi. This is essentially a one-pot dish from India, which combines rice, lentils, and spices. And I don't just want to point you to any khichdi, I want to point you to one particular one, which is a Rampuri khichdi. This is from the city of Rampur in North India. Now, I'm going to put on my glasses now so that I can see what I'm talking about. For those of you that aren't familiar, Rampur is a former princely state. When I talk about a princely state, I'm talking about a territory that was ruled in the colonial period, not directly by the British Crown, but rather indirectly by a local ruler, or in this case, a local Nawab. That state is now contained within the modern state of Uttar Pradesh, and the main city, Rampur, is located just over 100 miles northwest of Delhi. Now in Rampur, khichdi is made specifically with rice and also urad dal, which is a split and skinned black gram. Now, what you see here, to whet your appetite, as I said, is a Rampuri khichdi with all of its condiments. So the condiments that would go with it would include things like chutney, also a mulia char, a kind of radish pickle, ghee or clarified butter, and til oil. And for a meal, it would also be served with a number of other dishes as well. So it might be served with something like a gobi gosht, of meat with cauliflower, a sag kofta or a spinach meatball, keema or minced meat, and perhaps a chicken curry. Now, as I indicated right at the beginning, I wanted to start with this dish because it has incredible cultural and historic significance. It's one of the staple rice dishes that Rampur was known for, historically at least. And it continues, as my research partner in Rampur, Dr. Tarana Khan, who you're going to meet shortly, describes it as the staple winter afternoon diet of Rampuri Muslims across all social strata. So it's kind of everyday fare, if you like. As Tarana writes, enter any Rampuri home in the old city at lunchtime, and you'll find a piping hot khichdi lunch in progress with condiments according to the station. It is a late breakfast meal for the Bail members before they depart for work, or a lazy lunch before a siesta in the sun. She then goes on to say that it has actually quite an important social function within Rampuri society in the form of the Khichdi Dawat, the Khichdi meal or dinner or feast. As she says, it implies a certain amount of closeness, a bond, a gentle mix of informality and hospitality. Close friends often invite themselves over for Khichdi, and this is highly appreciated and indicative of deep kinship. Now, I wanted to point out here that it's not just what you eat, but also how you eat. So the method of participating in this kind of meal is quite important too. Now, as we can see here, people tend to eat off their own plates. But previously, the kind of bonding effect of Khichdi was actually reinforced by it being served on a large round clay dish around which people sat and off which they ate. I have another quote here from Torana. She says, 3 or 4 people sat around it on the dastakhan. The dastakhan being a kind of tablecloth that would have been spread out on the floor, and ate with the ghee or oil percolating down the edges, frantically mixing chutney, muli achar, and gobi gosht before it turned cold. So hopefully I'm tempting your taste buds here. Now, I've talked to this point kind of about its cultural significance, but I wanted to underline too that this dish has a real important historical significance too within Rampuri culinary culture. And we can see this in that there's just innumerable recipes for it in local Persian and Urdu cookbooks. And these cookbooks include a really important set of manuscripts that were put together in the 1870s, seemingly to kind of capture the dishes that would have been cooked at the time for the Rampur royal court. In these manuscripts, we find not just khichdi and not just Rampuri khichdi with urad dal and rice, but actually over 50 types of yakhni pulao, so a spiced meat with a mung dal khichdi. There's also recipes for other types of khichris with meat. There's meatless khichri, and there's even what's called a khichri dawad khani, which is named after a local Rohilla chieftain. This particular khichri contains mung dal, rice, mincemeat, spinach, and also eggs. So we can see how this kind of mix of ingredients was clearly intended to kind of fortify a warrior, if you like. So you can see just a huge variety of these heritage recipes. Now, I indicated that my talk was actually about rice, not about khichdi. So I guess I wanted to kind of move next to really underline the importance of the rice itself to these heritage dishes. And we can really get a sense of this from some oral history. We've done some oral history in Rampur, and this is really a kind of something that's really at the heart, I suppose, of our broader research project. Now, what the interviews with older people in Rampur have really flagged up is the significance of a particular variety, and that variety is Tilak Chandan. They talk about the way in which the smell of the Tilak Chandan would waft through the mohalla or the neighborhood, and it would announce that the khichdi itself was being cooked. So I think you can see how Tilak Chandan itself was really kind of essential to the experience of this important dish. Now, what is Tilak Chandan? Well, Tilak Chandan, for those of you who aren't aware, is a heritage rice variety that was cultivated and cooked in the Rampur rice belt in North India until about the 1980s. And if you look at my slide here, you can see it pictured in comparison with a standard high-yield basmati. And of course, you'll also get a chance to look at it up close in some of the cooking demonstrations that we're going to have today. So as you can see from these images, and perhaps particularly the pictures under A, the Tilak Chandan at the top is basically shorter and fatter. And again, in the chart that you see next to it, chart B, which is the more precise data that's been produced by my collaborator in plant sciences, who you've met already, Professor Duncan Cameron. You can see how the length and the breadth of it do differ quite significantly from your standard basmati. Now, very sadly, I can't recreate this aspect for you in a virtual format, but what really distinguishes this rice, as perhaps the above quotation suggests, is its aroma, its smell. It's extremely aromatic with this very strong, lingering fragrance. Now, I noted that Tilak Chandan was grown more widely in the Rampur belt until about the 1980s. And it was at this point that it actually came to be replaced by high-yielding varieties, or what we now call HYVs. These were being pushed in the region, as well as other parts of India as well, by government programs that were associated with the Green Revolution. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of or read about the Green Revolution before and will be familiar with how India experienced it from the 1960s. The kind of main effect of it was a major impact on yields. Rice yields particularly were massively impacted. The productivity increased by something like 50%. So you can imagine the amazing effect this would have had on yields. At the same time, what has been noted by both scholars and activists as well is that these impressive yields were accompanied by really damaging social and ecological effects. And perhaps the most, significant of these was an irreversible impact on biodiversity. A country like India that had actually been home to more than 100,000 rice varieties saw its numbers dwindle to a few thousand as these HYVs were pushed by the government. And I should say that now in India today, HYVs cover more than 80% of India's rice acreage. Now, what we're especially interested in this project, what we're interested in Forgotten Food, is the cultural loss that accompanies this loss in agrobiodiversity. So what does it mean when we lose a rice like this for local cultures and local heritage? What we've seen through the oral history work that we've done is that Tilak Chandan has come to survive and to be celebrated only in the emotional memories of an older generation. And I guess the question for us as researchers is this mere nostalgia? Is this a kind of culinary nostalgia? Or was there actually something tangible in terms of taste and smell and texture, as well as nutrition and sustainability, that has been lost too? And also, what are some of the kind of less tangible cultural values, maybe in terms of certain foods and rituals that may have been lost too? Now, to try and start answering these questions, we decided we had to grow some Tilak Chandan. Our original plan was actually to grow it in the virtual rice paddies that we have at the University of Sheffield. And the idea was that if we grew it in these kind of scientific environments, in these virtual rice paddies, that we could actually recreate the historical conditions under which it would have been grown before certain modern pathogens entered the soil and India came to experience some of the more dramatic effects of climate change. So in the scientific environment, we thought that we could actually alter the soil, we could alter the patterns of light and heat to actually recreate 1940s Rampur by drawing on historical climate data. Unfortunately, COVID intervened, and we kind of had to do what we could in that situation. And thus, we took a decision to actually grow it in the field instead. So to grow it in Rampur in 2020. And we were incredibly fortunate to be able to work with the man that you see on my slide here. This is the figure of Mr. Brinder Singh Sadhu, who farms at Benazir Farm outside Rampur. And he was the one who was responsible for working quite independently in the pandemic circumstances to lead our field trial. Now, I don't have too much time to go into the kind of ins and outs of our field trial now, but perhaps sufficient to say it hasn't been an entirely straightforward process. First of all, we have the actual difficulties of finding seed. We started by trying to recover the seed for Tilak Chandan from a seed bank, particularly a Brihi seed bank, which is run by the renowned ecologist Debal Deb. And I really should do a shout out at this point to the amazing work that Debal is doing there. He actually had one local variety that we were interested in, that was Hans Raj, but he didn't have Tilak. So then Tarana tried to procure it from a local village market, but we could see then that the rice had been kind of mixed with hybridized varieties. So it had some of the aroma, but it was much lighter. And eventually the seed was actually procured through networks of farmers by Mr. Sandhu from a farmer in nearby Bilaspur. So that was the first problem. A second problem we experienced was actually the difficulties of growing it. Tilak takes a long time to grow. It takes something like 6 months in the field rather than 4 months. And because it's in the field much longer, it's much more likely to experience infection. So you'll see from one of the later images that I'll show that our crop experienced pest infestations, especially from Gandhi bug or earhead bee bug, which had to be treated with 2 lots of pesticides. And then because it is so tall, at least compared to the short HYVs, it is prone to collapse, particularly in rainstorms and also strong winds. And as it collapses, this can cause the wet sheaves to rot. And indeed, this is exactly what happened to our crop the night after Diwali last year, when unseasonable rainstorms left a quarter of our plants on the ground, as you can see in the images before you. Fortunately, Mr. Sandhu was able to still harvest the rest of the crop a couple of days later. And then the third and kind of final set of problems that we faced was the difficulties of output. Putting together everything I've talked about so far meant that, first of all, the yield is very low. And we can get a sense of this from the chart that has been put together by Duncan for the slide that you see here. You can see here that he's compared the yield from our field trial with the average paddy yield for all of India over a 10-year period. And from this, we can see that the average yield in India over that period is something like 3,707 kilograms per acre. The Tilak Chandan yield was just 0.75% per hectare. So if we look at that data, you can see that the average yield is the great big green dot, and the Tilak Chandan yield is the tiny white dot. Unsurprisingly, the effects of this low yield is that this is a product that is also extremely expensive. So if I move on to another chart that I think I've just gone off my chart here, but there we go, that Duncan has produced, that it works out at something like 6,000 rupees, 6,600 rupees per kilogram, as compared to a minimum of 23 rupees per kilogram for other classes of rice. Now, so far, we've only, my slides keep adjusting here as I'm going along. So far, we've only been able to do some informal taste tests, and we're hoping that after the pandemic subsides somewhat, that we may be able to do something more formal. But so far, we've done these informal taste tests. They've been hosted wonderfully by Tarana in Rampur. And I think what they're suggesting to us so far, I think I just need to adjust my screen again. There we go. Is that whatever the difficulties in actually growing this rice, the taste and the texture of this rice is very distinct, and the cultural value of it is very high. So we did what we've been calling the two kitchery experiment, which involved Torana gathering a group, some of whom had some memory of Tilak Chandan and others who did not. And they were served one khichdi that was made from ordinary hybrid basmati, and then another that was made from our Tilak Chandan. And there's a few, I think, observations that have jumped out to us immediately. First of all, everybody latched on to the very distinct aroma that was associated with the cooking of this rice. The second one was that everyone was easily able to distinguish between the two rice types, particularly because of the texture. So that the small grain of the tilak meant that it was fatter, softer, and quite kind of sticky or lumpy. So as one person observed, it was much more like a kind of risotto rice, while the hybrid basmati was longer and fluffier, and to many, much more visually appealing as a result. Now, this is perhaps not the best science, but perhaps the best quote, at least, came from Mr. Sandhu, our farmer, who said, "How can I not recognize the grain that I've nurtured for 6 months?" And then a third observation, which was that all but one, who was actually not from Rampur and had not eaten tilak in their childhood, found the tilak khichdi much more appealing in terms of taste and eating. In fact, Purana noted that having tried both of the khichris would then only eat the tilak khichdi, which left Purana very relieved that she cooked much more of that than the hybrid variety. So that just leaves us with the question of where do we go next? What next with this project of resurrecting Tilak Chandan? Well, first off, I'm glad to say that we have now been able to import some seed to the UK. And so we will now be going ahead with our lab-based tests. In fact, Duncan was just saying to us before we started today that he's now ready to set off on this task. And I think this should be really interesting in terms of kind of monitoring the impact of soil and climate on rice taste and texture, especially because, as I noted, we're actually going to be able to recreate the historical circumstances in which the tilak was grown. The second is that we're really kind of trying to think about what we do with all this. It's all very well, I suppose, to grow heritage in small amounts, perhaps for family consumption or for well-heeled connoisseurs. But a question that comes to us is how do we actually recognize the value, the cultural value of this heritage rice by reaching more than a niche market as the expense of this heritage food may demand? Also, what are some of the key traits that are actually needed to make it more reliable within India's current soil and climate conditions? So how do we combat some of those problems that we've experienced to do with pest resistance, drought resistance, and the like? And then also, what are some of the opportunities that there might be for this especially fragrant rice in terms of things like selective breeding, novel hybrids, perhaps even GM? That brings us to another question, which is if we start adapting this rice, is it still Tilak Chandan at all? So these are all some of the questions that we're grappling with in this project. And of course, we would welcome to hear from all of you about what you think on them as well. Now, I just have a couple more slides before I finish up. My next slide just points you to some articles, both published and to come, for those who might like to know more, ask more about this aspect of our project. And what I will do is I'll post this in the chat so that you can follow up the links in your own time. And then I did just want to point you to a couple of other publications as well that are linked to this project that you might enjoy following up after today's session. So first of all, I just wanted to note that we do have a monthly column that we do in Scroll magazine, and this has been running since July 2020, so nearly a year. And you can see from the slide that you got here that we've done some fascinating articles on breakfast in Lucknow, the social obligations of Bakar Eid, rice in Bengali culture, street food, the history of korma, and much more. And many of our articles are also accompanied by heritage recipes. So that might inspire some of the more adventurous chefs amongst you as well. And then also I wanted to direct your attention to a wonderful collection of food writing from Muslim South Asia that we've produced. This includes essays and fiction that have been edited by our wonderful co-investigator, Claire Chambers. This collection has been published by Picador in India as Desi Delicacies and by Beacon Books in the UK as Dafna Khan. And this includes contributions and recipes from several of our presenters today, including Tarana, Sadaf, and myself, as well as many others who are connected with the project, and many of whom I hope are out in our audience today as well. So I've done a lot of talking so far, so I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to stop talking about Tilak Chandan, because what we want to do next is cook some Tilak Chandan. So I'm going to hand over now to my main collaborator on the project in Rampur, Dr. Tarana Hossain Khan. She's going to be billed today as a food writer, but she's also a public historian and a novelist. And I would really highly recommend her novel, which has come out recently, The Begum and the Dastan, which also focuses on Rampur. And she's going to take us back to where I started today, which is with Rampuri Khichdi. So I'm going to hand things over to you now, Tarana.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. And thank you for the generous introduction, Siobhan. It's really an honor to be here and it has been a wonderful journey with this project. And I couldn't believe that just a sentence in my food writing about how people yearned for Tilak Chandan and the aroma of Tilak Chandan, how it could just end in this project, you know. And it has been such a beautiful journey because it was doing something, you know, real. It was something that was resurrection of something that was dying. And this was really recent memory. Like we had it till the 1980s, late 1980s. We had Tilak Chandan and we had Hansraj. Those were the only two rices we used. And suddenly they were there no more. And of course, when you're busy with things, you don't notice. And then you do, because then people remind you that, do you remember that? And you don't immediately. And the important thing was, what I realized was that I just stopped eating khichdi. I just became a khichdi hater in this land of khichdi lovers. And so that's why I wrote about this khichdi, which is the staple diet of every Rampuri, and how I had to hide my repugnance of khichdi and just cover it up by eating a lot of cauliflower meat and all that stuff instead of khichdi. But the day we actually cooked the first khichdi from Tilak Chandan, I loved it. Because maybe I was missing that taste without realizing what I was missing. It was that short grain rice, the aroma of that short grain rice. I think Siobhan has already been so evocative. Everybody is just dying to know more about khichdi now, or maybe they're just tired of hearing about khichdi. But anyway, this is about khichdi. So it was the melding together of khichdi and the dal and the ghee that goes into it, which cannot happen with a long grain rice. You know, and my mother often said, oh my God, this, you know, I want the khichdi to be soft because it sticks in my throat. The reason that it stuck in the throat was because she was used to the short grain rice. It had that smoothness to it, like kind of risotto-like maybe. So you will be surprised at the kind of the cultural significance of this simple dish and the simplicity of cooking it really. What is it? It's nothing. It's just boiled rice and lentil, nothing else. But it is amazing. And, you know, I've gotten back to wanting khichdi now. And I can understand that old timers, I don't know how they survive without Tilak Chandan, if I can feel the difference. and all my friends did. I hope we do more taste tests in the future. But as of now, I'm very sure that anybody who's had Tilak Chandan khichdi would not even want khichdi with basmati rice, which is the best rice that is available. So I think let's just start with the khichdi demonstration, maybe, so that unless you want me to go on and on more about khichdi, which I can, but it has been a lovely, and Professor Cameron has been really amazing and supportive, and how we managed to decipher, is this really Tilak Chandan? Should we sow it? Should we take the risk? All through the pandemic, it was just a leap of faith, an expensive leap of faith, but which really paid off for us and for our project. And I'm so happy at finally making it through with Tilak Chandan in spite of all the ups and downs that we had. So, well, over to this cooking demonstration. And I'm not a cook, so, well, I just managed it. So that's just a warning. I'll be talking more and cooking less. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharana. We'll go back to the studio now, and they're going to show your cooking demonstration.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Today we'll be talking about Rampuri Khichdi, and we're going to make Rampuri Khichdi. And it all begins with this rice. This is called Tilak Chandan. And you can see that the rice is it's a short grain, it's a very small grained rice. It's the heritage rice of Rampur. And khichdi is usually cooked in winters, right after the harvest of the rice. And it is cooked with urad dal, that is this black split urad dal, which is also freshly harvested at that time, though it is not winters at this time. But anyway, I thought let's just make some khichdi. It's the simplest of dishes, and it was the favorite of the common man and of the Nawab. So the Nawab loved his khichdi, and so did the common man. And even today, during winters, mid-morning breakfast, brunch kind of a thing is Rampuri khichdi with a lot of condiments. And right before going out to work, it's like a complete meal. Now, khichdi has been quite a favorite of Mughal emperors also, and it is the favorite of the common man. Somehow it kind of binds the commoners and the elite together in the love of rice and lentils. So we take about a cup of rice. This is Tilak Chandan, famous for its aroma, and it's not grown so much anymore. It's become like a rare rice, so we had to grow it specially. So this is a cup of rice and 1/3 cup of black urad lentils, and it's kind of mixed up together. Yeah, and it's simply boiled. It's just boiled with some ginger. Let's say about a 2-inch ginger, which is julienne, and it can also be crushed. Some people like it crushed, some people can just little bits of ginger. And this is peeli mirch, that is the yellow chili, which is found in Rampur, but you can cook it with red chili as well, red dried chili as well. It's just, it depends on you. If you want it a little bit kind of spicy, you can use more of it, or you can use less of it, whatever. And some salt. That's it. It's just boiled with that. And so here's Rampuri khichdi. So here we have all the ingredients. I have mixed the rice and the lentils. In fact, I added a little bit more of lentils because you can use 1/3 cup or more than 1/3 cup. We do it just by knack, but it should look something like this, And because it is new rice, it is just about matured for 6 months. We harvested in December, so we won't use so much of water. we put it, I use a pressure cooker. I'm more comfortable with a pressure cooker. So I'll just put this in the pressure cooker. Okay. Then I'll put the ginger. The yellow chilies. And about a teaspoon of salt is just enough. That's it. And then I'll just take about a cup of water. Just a cup of water. And because it's new, right, so less of water is required, and just a little splash more of water. Anyway, in a pressure cooker you require less, and that's it. And we'll just set it to boil, and hopefully we'll have our khichdi soon. So khichdi is basically a sort of a dish that one would just have in an informal way, but it is usually had with a lot of condiments. So we have asli ghee, this is ghee. We have this yellow chili chutney, which has garlic, yellow chilies and salt. And we also have some radish preserves. We can have cauliflower and meat. So basically it's got a lot of things, and that's why I say khichdi in itself is not such a delicious dish. You know, it's kind of not really bland, but yeah, it's just the base, and we keep using different condiments and then just eat it. So you have khichdi dawat, that is like you call people over, you are kind of close to your family members, you call them over for a khichdi dawat, which has everything. It will have probably a korma, it will have meat and cauliflower, it will have so many other things, and then there is khichdi. And so that just shows a sort of an informality between people, and it is a sort of a, you can say, brotherhood, a sort of an informality between relatives. So in winters, there are lots of khichdi dawats all over Rampur.
Yeah.
So now khichdi is on the boil, and because this is a pressure cooker that I'm using, so generally 4 whistles of the pressure cooker, and you turn the flame down and let the steam escape by itself. Or if you are cooking in a pan, you'll have to keep checking. In fact, you have to use more water in a pan, because it'll take more water to become tender enough. But it shouldn't be too, not like lumps, it should be a little bit, light. Yeah, now the khichdi is really done, and you can smell it. It's like amazing smell. That is of tilak chandan. And now it is, it's kind of light, but it's not, shouldn't be in lumps. And this is our khichdi. Favorite meal of every Rampuri. Nawab Hamid Ali Khan was famous for rewarding his chefs if they cook the perfect khichdi. And I think I need a reward this right now, because I think I did really, really well with this khichdi. Much more than I expected. And he rewarded his chef by sending all his sons to Aligarh Muslim University for studies, except one who was supposed to stay back and learn the skill of his father. Yeah, so how about a little bit of a sample of the khichdi? So proud of myself today. Well, you take a little bit of khichdi. Okay, you can have it with green chutney or yellow chutney, ghee. Some people even have it with cream, though I don't have it with cream. But yes, a little bit of ghee, a little bit of chutney, and people, of course, as I said, they have it with the cauliflower and meat. So you mix it with your hand. That's important. You mix it with your hand. The aroma is so good. And here it is. Lovely.
Thank you so much for that amazing demonstration, Tarana.
Thank you.
I'm sure we were all wishing that we could also partake in the tasting at the end there as well.
I know.
I just noticed there was one question in the chat function that was about the length of the grain. Some of the pictures I showed in my slides were comparing the long grain to the short grain tilak, and just to reinforce, as of course Tarana did in her cooking demonstration, that the tilak chandan is a short grained rice. So just to clarify that point. We've had our main meal now, so we will now move on to our dessert. And in order to introduce this rice-based dessert, I'm going to be passing over now to another collaborator on our project, which is Sadaf Hossain. Sadaf is an amazing person. He's been a wonderful, lively personage in our project, and we're so grateful to him, not just for his chefing abilities, but for lifting all our spirits on so many occasions. Sadaf is a consultant chef. He has done a TEDx talk. He's done all sorts of amazing things and written some fantastic books as well. So I'm going to pass over to Sadaf to introduce himself further, and then we will be having his cooking demonstration of kheer, again using our tilak chandan. So over to you, Sadaf.
Thank you. That was an elaborate introduction. I usually go by just Sadaf, and rest is just the part and parcel. I come from a rice-eating land, and the funniest part of at least in India, is that almost every state is called as the rice bowl of India. So I come from a land which is Bihar and Jharkhand, and growing up, Bihar was considered as the rice bowl. Then most recently, I went to Madhya Pradesh, and that was called a rice bowl. And I have heard Punjab calling themselves as a rice bowl. So we don't know. Maybe the bowls are different. There's smaller and bigger bowls. That could be a reason why everyone is a rice bowl. Anyway, while growing up, of course, we were big time rice eaters, and Biharis, I think they enjoy their rice maybe twice or thrice a day. Because you have rice in different forms. So for example, rice or different preparations of rice, including khichdi. Then you have puffed rice, which is called mudhi or mudmure. Then you have the flattened rice, which is pohe, or as they call chura. And then again, dishes made up out of these different kinds of rices as well. And now the second thing that I should highlight is, of course, about the, this was the first time I was cooking with tilak chandan. Now, tilak chandan being a short grain, there are multiple of these. And I think this will also tie up with what Shaban was saying, you know, what's next and where to go with this shorter grain. Now, short grain in general has a lot more creamier texture and very nice aromatics. So in Bihar, while growing up, we also had farm, and we used to get a lot of different kinds and varieties of the rice before we succumbed ourselves to basmati rice only, and different kinds of basmati. So long grain basmati, longer grain basmati, or little lesser longer grain basmati. That's now what we usually get to eat. And what Siobhan quickly pointed out, 80% of course is eating basmati. And also because I think It looks good. So why not? That's the primary reason has always been, I believe. But if you talk about short grain rice, we have Ambe Mohar, which comes from Kashmir. And that's also very age-old traditional rice, shorter again. Then we have Gobindo Bhog, which I have recently discovered as early as like 3-4 years back, which comes from Bengal. Again, a very short grain rice. Then there is Mulan Kosamba, which is from down south, Wayanad. They also make biryani out of it. So anyway, the point being that there are so many short grain rice available. My belief is that these are shorter grain which only limited to a particular geography, but there are so many people using it. And it has really nice aroma. Now, while cooking this particular dish as well, which is kheer, kheer and khichdi, I think, has been in part of Indian culture since forever, or as they say, since sliced bread. So we don't know how every era, every time, every day it has a part to play in your life. Here specifically, of course, I will talk about that in the video as well. Yeah, you will hear me talk more in the video. So over to you now, Shimon.
Fantastic, Sadaf. Thank you so much. And we will go back to the studio for your cooking demonstration.
One dish with so many names. Kheer is kheer in general, but there are the names. Shirika, Gile Firdaus, Firni, which is a version of kheer. Rice pudding, which I don't necessarily like. Payash or payasham. The reason I don't necessarily like rice pudding because I think it doesn't really do justice with kheer, the name kheer basically. Now, kheer is a very simple and not very complicated dish. That's what people will tell you. I won't do that. It is simple and yet it is complex. Like the usage of different things in making kheer. For example, milk. Now, what kind of milk you should be using? Should you use full cream or half and half? I personally like using full cream. It gives that creamy texture. Second, the kind of vessel. Aluminium, steel, iron, earthen, whatever like you want to use, you can. I personally prefer earthen pots. It just again adds to the entire process and makes your kheer a lot thicker. So that's the second tip. Third is the kind of grain that you use, longer or the shorter. I personally like using these short grains. Now, what the good thing about short grains is that they add texture to your kheer, and this is Tilak Chandan. Now, Tilak Chandan adds a lot of different kinds of aroma as well. So imagine all these different simple things in the kheer to make a complex and yet simple dish to you. Now, kheer is something which has been in circulation, so to speak, since forever. It's been eaten by lords, the gods, the goddesses, and us mere mortals. It was also used by Romans, and they used kheer or rice pudding as a detox. Now, the recipe I am going to be using is from a 12th century textbook called Manas Ullasa. Today is 21st century, and recipe hasn't changed much. Of course, people add or tweak their own versions, but the base is the same that I will be using. So there are a lot of other myths, folklore around kheer. We'll talk about that as well. But as of now, let's get cooking.
Fire and then boil your milk. I am using earthen pot to boil my full cream milk. Earthen pot adds really nice flavor. Then you basically wash and soak your rice. So like soak it till you make it. I usually like to soak for 35-40 minutes. It helps cook rice properly and reduce timing as well. Then also you got to keep looking and checking your milk, because if you're using 2 liters, then you have to make it like 1.5 or 1 liter. Then let's also pound our elaichi or cardamom. Just like European cuisines have vanilla, many Indian sweet dishes have cardamom. And then take your warm milk, because you got to infuse saffron in this. What it does is that it adds really nice aroma and flavor to your kheer, and you can also say I'm having saffron infused kheer.
As we wait for the milk to boil and reduce, let's talk some stories. So there are multiple stories about kheer that I was mentioning. First one, actually all of them I love. First one being It's a story from Konark Temple, Odisha. Now, the story or the folklore goes that it was kheer which kind of helped Konark Temple's construction. What happened? They were trying to construct Konark Temple, but every time they throw stone in the water, it will sink. So what to do, nobody kind of knew how to do it. And then finally they thought, okay, let's just park these ideas up now because clearly we're not able to construct the temple. So this guy came in, the young chap, and he said, okay, let me show you how you can construct. And he used kheer as the base to sort of give the idea. So he used rice and then poured some milk on top of it and then started showing how you can construct Konark Temple. And till date, Konark Temple or in Odisha, kheer is distributed. It's one of the common and most popular delicacies of Odisha. Now, the second story, which is where the payasam comes from down south, from a small town called Amalapuza, which is in Amalapuza, it's a district. Lord Krishna took an avatar of sage and then comes down on earth and challenges the king there and says, I want to challenge you on a game of chess. And king said, okay, yeah, sure, who are you to defeat me, because I am the pro here. Krishna said, sure, so let's just start. However, if you lose and if I win, then you are going to give me rice grain. Each box, so the first box will have one rice grain and then will subsequently get doubled. Of course, the king said, but of course, Lord being Lord, he defeated the king and thereby he won like quintals and quintals of grains. Now the king said, I am not able to give you this much grain because otherwise I will be really poor and I can't afford that much grain as well. So then Lord said, okay, don't worry, then construct a temple and every time when people come here, you're going to give them free kheer or free payash. King agreed, and till date it is called, or it is just still considered as that debt that the king had over Lord Krishna, that still he is paying off. So that's the second one. Third one, of course, is usual kheer that we eat, is a cultural aspect of Hindustan, of India, where irrespective of your birthday, if you on your death day or your anniversary, and many other places, you make kheer. This is also the dish that is made when a new bride comes home. So that's another interesting part. So yeah, kheer has many sort of integral things that holds India together. Let's get back to kitchen now.
Look at this, it's almost half, like 1.5 at least. And now we're going to add our rice, which we soaked, if you remember. Now add all of these things together, make sure they are cooked together, because this is the last, almost the last and final stage. This is what you will get kheer from. Now once you start cooking, this will look something like this. It's almost done. Look how creamy it is looking. It's all because of using the short grain rice. Now let's add some of our milk, which is infused with saffron. It will give that all those goodness, and of course fancy saffron kheer you will get at the end. Now this is dried or evaporated milk, which is not part of the original recipe from Manas Ullasa, and also usage of dry fruits or nuts. I like to add these things because it makes kheer creamier and have nicer texture. Now we add our khoa, and on top of it we add sugar. Sugar must be added towards the end, not in the beginning. And you can adjust sugar as per your likeness. You can also do honey, you can also add jaggery. So all these options, and don't spill like I did. That is not part of the recipe. You can use a bigger vessel if you have, that's a better option. Let's add some nuts towards the end, and again give it a nice mix, nice stir, so that it goes everywhere in the pot. And when you're having it, you get nuts, you get rice, you get everything good in one spoon. It looks beautiful. It's done, guys. This is very done. Now, of course, you can eat the way you want. I am showing you this in traditional ware as well as earthen pots. Many of the places, kheer is served in these kind of bowls. You can also use a normal regular thing as well. Nothing fancy.
Moment of truth. I am going to be eating my own kheer. And let me tell you already, it is amazing because I have cooked it, and it's not the first time cooking kheer. But this is, as I was saying, with Tilak Chandan rice. Let's try it out first. The addition of khoa and elaichi. Khoa is making it a lot more creamier. Elaichi or the cardamom, nice aroma it is giving. And as I'm mentioning, because I've used the shorter grain, it adds to the creaminess texture of the kheer, and that's what you want. That's exactly the main essence of the entire dish. So yeah, this is my version of the same 12th century text of Manasollasa. You can create a similar kind of flavors as well. You can add different flavors in this. For example, it's mango season, so you can add mango in this. You can add different kinds of flavors. You can add blackcurrant to make it a little tangy, any kind of fruits that you can add or you want to add, not papaya, that won't work. But in general, other fruits which have nice texture, nice flavor to it, please go ahead and you can experiment with that as well. So this is my version. I am going to be enjoying my plain simple and not so simple kheer. You guys go ahead and give it a shot. Make your version as well.
Okay, my mouth is watering, and I'm sure all of yours are as well. I so wish that we could all be in the same room so that we could share food, share rice together, not break bread, but share rice. Thank you so much, Sada, for that amazing demonstration. I don't think we've got any questions from the chat at the moment. So we're going to move on now. I'm also aware of time. So we're going to move on now to the next segment in our production today, in our event. So I'm very pleased to introduce a fellow historian, Dr. Razak Khan. Razak has been, again, an essential member of our Forgotten Food team, and he's brought particular expertise on the history of Rampur. I hope you will all at some point get a chance to read his book, Minority Past, Locality, Emotions and Belonging in Rampur. I'm going to hand over to him now because he's going to be introducing our performance, our oral performance, storytelling performance. So over to you now, Razak.
Thank you, Siobhan. I'm trying to share my screen if that requires permission. Okay, there you are. Am I audible at this stage? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. Perhaps late evening for some of you in India. It's a great pleasure to see you. What can you say after seeing food? You can just talk about more food. So I suppose that's what we'll do in this session. We'll be talking about poetry of food, but also the taste of poetry. My name is Razak, and I've been researching the history of Rampur. I wouldn't call myself any expert on food, but I certainly enjoy well-cooked food. And researching on Rampur has been wonderful for that reason, because it converted me from a very strict vegetarian to a diehard fan of non-veg cooking. I arrived in Rampur in 2007 and to look at manuscripts about political history, and Rampur is exemplary because it has one of the most beautiful libraries, a palace that now is known as Rampur as a library. And it has very chatty librarians and visitors who will tell you about things that you should be researching. And I was lucky to be directed to one of the rarely studied, but a very important text of Rampur as a library collection, which I'm happy to report, which of course existed in Urdu version published by Rampur as a library, but will now be available to the English audience, hopefully next month as an incomparable festival. This is, of course, the Musaddas-e-Jasn-e-Benazir, written by the last major Rekhti Go poet, the Rekhti Goi poetry is a well-studied literary genre in academic circles, but almost a forgotten food, a forgotten genre of poetic expression, borrowing, adapting, appropriating what would be called as women's idiom or women's language, which traditionally was used for the domestic domain, everyday concern, food being an important part. But Jean Charles' innovation in Rampur was to turn this corpus into an elaboration of a public festival, the Jasn-e-Benazir. It's a long text which talks about a variety of things, and we will discuss what is the connection between talking about your patron rulers and the cooks of the Rampur estate. We will also discuss how is kheer related to the beauty of your beloved, but we will turn to that in a minute. Let me quickly show you some of the visual before we turn to the performative dimension of this text. So this text shows you imagery and versified description of water carriers and food vendors of the festival that started in late 1860s in Rampur to mark the reign of Nawab Qalb Ali Khan. But the text is not just about the rulers. It is about the marketplace, the place of the Mela festival. And Bazaar, as you know, is the biggest archive of India's spices, taste, and people. So here are oak hookah and opium smokers shown in the text. There's also, of course, the sweet sellers. Furthermore, there are women selling pitchers and fruits. Now, what you are going to see is an adaptation for the first time by two Dastango who have, and I must add, female Dastango, and we'll come to the politics of why that is important. I was lucky to collaborate with scriptwriter and a remarkable scholar of Urdu literature too, Danish Iqbal Saab, alongside India's first female Dastango, Fawzia Dastango, and an emerging scholarly but also practitioner of women's idiom and expression, Sanaya. So what we are going to now do, I don't want to take your time, but what we have created is from a textual versified archive with visual, we have adapted this text also for a performance. This is important because the argument should be that Indian texts, which are now textualized in Oriental studies, were in fact in origin performative texts. They were in fact performed. Jan Saab did perform this text before it was written and made into this manuscript, which is still preserved in the Rampur Library. So without further ado, I request Yvonne to take us to a pre-recorded version of this adaptation.
Thank you so much, Razak, and we'll go back to the studio now.
ख्वातीन हजरात आदाब। तो हाजरीन, पेश है जश्न बेनज़ीर, एक रेख्ती गोई पेशकश। तो हाजरीन, फिर अगले साल सा वही शोहरा है जश्न का,
फिर देखो वही धूम धड़का है जश्न का,
बदरे मुनीर फिर बुआ मेला है जश्न का,
फिर बेनज़ीर बाग में जलसा है जश्न का,
फिर चहचहे वही हैं हर एक दिल हजार में,
फूला है गुल खुशी का अजब फिर बहार में,
फूला है गुल खुशी का अजब फिर बहार में। तो ख्वातीन हजरात, चलिए आपको थोड़ी देर के लिए 150 बरस पहले के रामपुर लिए चलते हैं। वो रामपुर जो दारुस सुरूर था, जो अपनी रौनकों के लिए मशहूर था, जहां का हर अहले फन एक जलवे नूर था, राहिए तजल्लिए कोहे तूर था, हाथी में दौरां दस्तगीरे बेकसां हुजूर पुरनूर वालिए रामपुर। अरे भाई, नवाब कल्बे अली खां बहादुर खुल्द आशियान 1857 کے بعد کے دور میں تھے فخر ہندوستان. ان کے نورتنوں میں تھے داغ دہلوی, امیر مینائی اور میر یار علی جان. یار علی جان جو ریختی لکھتے تھے, ابھنو یعنی عورتوں کی زبان, ہماری تمہاری زبان میں شعر کہتے تھے.
میر یار علی جان ریختی کے آخری بڑے شاعر تھے اور لکھنؤ و دلی اجڑنے کے بعد رامپور کی پناہ گاہ میں آ گئے تھے. 1857 میں جب نواب صاحب نے حکومت کی باغ ڈور سنبھالی تو جلوس کے سال کو یاد کرنے کی ایک طرز نکالی, یعنی ایک سالانہ میلے کی بنیاد ڈالی جس کی مدت 8-10 روز ہوا کرتی تھی.
اور بہن, اس جشن کے لیے باغ بے نظیر کو چنا گیا اور موسم بہار کے حساب سے مارچ کا مہینہ مقرر کیا گیا. یہ میلہ 22 سال تک, جی ہاں ذرا غور فرمائیے گا, 22 سال تک کر و فر کے ساتھ جاری رہا اور سیر و تفریح کی, تہذیب و تمدن کی مثال بن گیا. عوام و خواص کی میٹھی یادوں میں رچ بس گیا. اس جشن میں ہر سال شاعر و فنکار اور موسیقار و گلوکار دور دور سے آتے تھے بھنو, اور رقاصائیں, طوائفیں, مصور اور دستکار بھی جشن کو رونق بخشتے تھے. قوال, میراثی, نجومی, سنار, عطار اور 4 بیت گانے والے اپنا الگ رنگ جماتے تھے. اہل ہنر اور اہل صنعت و حرفت ایک الگ ہی دنیا کی جھلک دکھلاتے تھے بھائی.
نٹ نٹنیاں, ساکنے, گھوسنے, منہارنے, پنہارنے, کھیل تماشے والے, جادو اور کرتب والے بھی محفل کو 4 چاند لگاتے تھے. پینے کے لائق تمام تر مشروبات اہل ذوق کو اور باذوق بناتے تھے, اور پھر سب کے سب لذیذ کھانوں کی دکانوں کا رخ کرتے تھے اور نامور خانساماؤں کے کمالات سے لذت کام و دہن بہم پہنچاتے تھے. اور اشتہا انگیز ذائقوں کے بعد شاعری کی محفلوں اور ریختی کی لذتوں سے زبان 2 آتشہ سہ آتشہ کرتے تھے.
خود نواب صاحب میلے کے دوران اپنا خاص محل چھوڑ کر یہیں 2 منزلہ کوٹھی میں آ جاتے تھے بھنو, اور تقریبات کا شب و روز پورا لطف لیتے تھے. امیر عمرہ کے خیمے, عدالت فوجداری اور فوج کے رسالے بھی پاس کے حصے میں شہر بساتے تھے. باغ کے بیچوں بیچ کی گہری نہر میں بجریں اٹکھیلیاں کرتے, کوٹھی کی جانب کی چھوٹی نہر میں فوارے رواں رہتے, 4 بیت کے اکھاڑے دف پر 4 بیت گاتے تھے.
دکھن کی طرف کی دروازے سے نواب صاحب کا جلوس آتا تھا. اسی دروازے سے دونوں طرف دکانوں کا لمبا سلسلہ شروع ہوتا جس میں بمبئی, کلکتہ اور دلی کا بہترین سامان ملتا تھا. سارا شہر ادنا سے اعلیٰ تک اس میلے میں آتا تھا. سال بھر کا رنج ہر ایک دل سے نکل جاتا تھا.
تو 8-10 دن یہ میلہ اسی تکلف اور آرائش سے رہتا تھا جیسے ایک دریائے عیش باغ میں چاروں طرف بہتا تھا. باغ کا تختہ تختہ مثل خانہ عروس مہک اٹھتا تھا. ہر روش پر مثل خندہ گل کٹورا کھنکتا تھا. اتنے بڑے میلے میں انتظام کی یہ خوبی تھی بھنو کہ اگر کسی کی سوئی بھی گر جائے تو بھائی جہاں گرے وہ وہیں پائے. ہاں, شام میں چراغا ہوتا, پھر آتش بازی کا مظاہرہ ہوتا.
جان صاحب مشاعروں کی جان تھے بھائی, کہتے بھی کیا خوب تھے اور پڑھتے بھی خوب تھے. مشاعروں میں زنانہ لباس میں آتے تھے اور پڑھنے میں وہ نازافرینیاں دکھاتے تھے کہ حاضرین ہنستے ہنستے لوٹ جاتے تھے. رامپور کے دور میں उम्र दराज हो चुके थे, इसीलिए कमर में जो पटका बांधते थे उसी को खोलकर मुशायरे में ओढ़ लेते थे।
तो जश्न बेनज़ीर को जहां साहिब ने एक तफसीली मुसद्दस लिखकर और भी बेनज़ीर बना दिया है। ये मुसद्दस रेख्ती का एक शाहकार है, लेकिन एक तारीखी दस्तावेज भी है। इसमें 52 अहम लोगों का जिक्र मौजूद है और जश्न के एक एक पहलू की पूरी पूरी रुदात भी है। ऐसी मुकम्मल तस्वीर खींची है जिससे मेले का समा आंखों के सामने फिर आ जाता है। और कमाल ये है कि अहले कमाल का जब जिक्र आता है तो उनके फन और हुनर की रियायत से ऐसी इस्तिलाहात का इस्तेमाल किया जाता है कि भाई बात का लुत्फ दो बाला हो जाता है। भाई गुल है ज़मीं पे आज फलक पर दिमाग है,
कहती सबा है बाग में सब बाग बाग हैं,
ताबिंदा अपने हुस्न से लाला के दाग हैं,
दिन रात के चमन में हमें तुम चराग हैं,
कहता है आफताब गुले माहताब से,
ये बाग सींचा जाता है केवड़े गुलाब से। जश्न बेनज़ीर पे मुसद्दस रेख्ती को तारीख और तारीख को तहजीब के सांचे में ढाल देता है और बिला वास्ता तौर से औरतों की ज़बान और उस ज़बान में छुपे मानी और मफाहीम के जहान की दिल फरेब झलक भी दिखाता है। गर्दिश वक्त ने, सियासत के सैले बला ने क्या कुछ हमसे छीन लिया, उसका एहसास भी ये मुसद्दस कराता है। इस मुसद्दस में 52 लोगों का नाम और उनके काम का हवाला आता है। 6 शायरों, 8 दास्तान गोयों के साथ साथ मौसीकी के 18 उस्तादों और 11 तवाइफों के फ़न और ख़िदमात को अगर खिराज पेश किया गया है तो नथिया और चुन्नी नामी कनीज़ों का भी नाम शामिल किया गया है।
बेशक। तो इस मुसद्दस में 339 शेर हैं जो कि रक़्स व मौसीकी और तहजीब व सकाफत का अक्स दिखाते हैं, लेकिन वो भाई वक्त की कमी की वजह से शामिल नहीं किए जा सकते हैं। इसलिए हम बस चंद ही लजीज शेर आपके सामने पेश करने जा रहे हैं। लजीज का मतलब ये है कि या तो वो लज्जत-ए कामो दहन से मुताल्लिक हैं या फिर लज्जत-ए ज़हन से मुताल्लिक हैं। जैसे लजीज जायकों का मज़ा दावत-ए ताम से मिलता है, वैसे ही ज़बान का चटखारा एक नादिर रेख्ती के निस्वानी कलाम से मिलता है। तो चलिए रेख्ती के सुनहरी दौर की जानिब अब परवास करते हैं और मिठाइयों की शीरी बातों से आगाज करते हैं।
हलवाइयों की पालों की कसरत है जा बजा,
दुकान ए बिखुरमा है लख पेड़ से सवा,
हलवाई पूरी बात भला करने पाए क्या,
ए बर्फी जान हो जहां गाहक हजार हा, ऐसा न होगा मिस्र का बाजार उई गर्म,
मिस्री निबात पूछ की आती है मुझको शर्म,
शीरी अदा मिठाई कहीं लेते हैं खड़े,
फरहाद अमिड़ चिड़े आशिक भी हैं अड़े,
गुपचुप है डोरे नशे के आंखों में है पड़े,
लड्डू की तरह सैकड़ों है छोटे और बड़े,
दिल रखने की जगह नहीं हर सू पुकार है,
रेवड़ी के गोया फेर में दुकानदार है,
छोटे कहीं है ख्वानचे वाले कहीं बड़े,
सक्ते बजा रहे हैं कटोरे कहीं खड़े,
रसिया झुके हुए हैं जहां रस के हैं घड़े,
दंदान मिस्री ऐसी कि दांतों से जो लड़े,
जो चीजें हैं वो मेले में वो लाजवाब हैं,
माही तवे की सीखों के
भुनते कबाब हैं, अफ्यूनी जमा है कहीं अफ्यून घुलती है,
गन्ने हैं छिलते मुरमुरों की टिकियां तुलती हैं,
रेशम की तरह नर्म ज़बां उन पे खुलती है,
اپنی تو تب آخر کے پیالوں پہ ڈلتی ہے.
افیونیوں سے پوستیوں کا کلام ہے.
معشوق یہ مٹھائی عجب
لالا فام ہے. حلوہ سوہن وہ جو کہیں پر ہے پک رہا.
رنگت پہ جس کی دھوکا ہے صابن کا ہوا.
دکاندار کہتے ہیں یہ بے نظیر کے.
بدرے منیر پیالے ہیں براق کھیر کے.
خوش ہیں ابال دودھ کی صورت ہے لا رہی.
اور کھٹے میٹھے بول ہیں اپنے سنا رہی.
ہے عشق کو تو حسن کا ضامن بنا رہی.
بالائی بالا دل میں ہے نقشہ جما رہی.
میٹھی زباں دہی سی سو ایسی بولی ہے.
جو بات گھوسنوں کی ہے مکھن کی گولی ہے.
جو بات گھوسنوں کی ہے مکھن کی گولی ہے. کبڑنی بھی ڈالیاں لائی ہری ہری.
باقی ادائیں ایسی ہر ایک سبز ہے پری.
سینوں پہ ان کے حسن کی نارنگیاں دھری.
کندن سا رنگ حسن میں ایک ایک ہے کھری.
کولے سے باغ میں کھڑی باندھے قطار ہیں.
جو بن وہ ہیں کہ میلے کی گویا بہار ہیں.
جو بن وہ ہیں کہ میلے کی گویا بہار ہیں. تو خواتین و حضرات، ریختہ کی اس پیشکش میں کھانوں کا ذائقہ، زبان کا چٹخارا دراصل اس لذت کا استعارہ ہے جو شعر و ادب کے راستے عوام و خواص کی یکجائی کا مظہر اور ہماری تہذیب کا سرمایہ ہے. اصغر علی حکیم وہ ہیں داستان گو.
احمد علی سے کم نہیں قاسم علی سے وہ.
ہے لکھنؤ کے چرب زباں اوئی کیوں نہ ہو.
سید علی بھی فرد ہیں اس فن میں آج تو.
جھڑتے ہیں پھول منہ سے عجب خوش بیان ہیں.
بلبل کی طرح کہتے صدا
داستان ہے. دو داستان گویوں نے یہ بات کی نئی.
کیا خوب داستان کہی دھوم دھام کی.
2 روز میں بھی سننے کو اے بیگم آ گئی.
صحبت یہی چمن میں عجب بے نظیر تھی.
حمزہ کی ہے قسم کہیں یاری میر نے.
یہ دیکھا بزم لوٹ کی لو ساری میر نے.
دنیا میں اوئی بچے نہ ہو کیوں وہ نیک خون.
مہدی کا جو غلام رضا کا غلام ہو.
استاد خوش نویس ہے ایک داستان گو.
نثار بے بدل کوئی شاعر ہے دیکھ لو.
یہ چاروں فن بنے اسی استاد کے لیے.
زیبا یہ فن ہے امباہی پرشاد کے لیے.
زیبا یہ فن ہے امباہی پرشاد کے لیے. تو جان صاحب کی ریختہ گوئی ہمیں خلوت سے جلوت کی طرف لاتی ہے، گھر بار سے دربار لے جاتی ہے. باورچی خانے اور انگنائیوں کی ٹھٹولیوں اور ہنسی مذاق کی باتوں سے اوپر اٹھ کر یہ ارتقاء پذیر ریختہ گوئی خواتین کی زبان اور اس کے پیراستہ بیان کو دربار کے راستے، عوام و خواص سے رابطے کا وسیلہ بناتی ہے.
فہرست کاملوں کے یہ اظہار نامہ ہے.
سرکار جب سنیں گے تو دربار نامہ
ہے فکر خاتمے کی کہا کار نامہ ہے.
سننے میں سہل کہنے میں دشوار نامہ ہے. کر کر نقر اسم نویسی سناؤں گی، نواب نامدار سے انعام پاؤں گی.
جب تک رہے جہان میں کعبے کی یہ بنا،
جب تک کہ ڈنکا بجتا رہے لوگ دین کا.
جو کچھ بقا ہے میں نے ریاضت قبول ہو
حق ادا نمک کا سعادت حصول ہو.
شہروں میں رام پور کی اب دھوم ہو گئی،
شادی ہزاروں کو سو یہ معلوم ہو گئی.
سرکار ذی وقار کے اقبال کو صدا،
اللہ دے ترقی یہی اپنی ہے دعا.
واللہ میلہ جشن کا کیا خوب ہے ہوا.
اے جان کیا مجال میری جو کروں سنا.
लाखों हैं जलवे ऐसे मौजू न हो सके,
मौजू किसी तरह से वो मजमू न हो सके,
मौजू किसी तरह से वो मजमू न हो सके, मौजू किसी तरह से वो मजमू न हो सके।
Okay, am I audible again? Okay. So from the realm of digital, we are also lucky to have direct participation by the artists. I'm very pleased that our scriptwriter, Professor Danish Iqbal, who is a awarded writer, playwright, and professor at the ADK Mass Communication Research Center of Jamia Millia Islamia, has joined us. I also welcome Fawzia Dastango, India's first female Dastango, and who has been awarded by President of India for breaking the glass ceiling in what I might also call a fairly male-dominated vocal space of Dastango performance tradition. And Sanaya also joins us, who is assistant professor of English literature with a deep interest in Dastango and women's vocal expression. I encourage the audience to post their question, and while we wait and collect or also prepare the question for the preparation of text or any background question that you may have from the previous presentation, let me use this occasion to start the conversation. Okay, so I want to start by thinking about the larger aspect that we, in this project Forgotten Food are trying to do. We are trying to think of food from a historical perspective, but food also as an archive, And in a time where we are divided and separated and isolated, what might a different kind of archive may tell us? And the fact that both Tarana and Sad have brought this archive, literally cooked the archive in front of us and created a whole set of emotion, whether we got to eat this or not, it nevertheless created this transnational digital aspect. So what might such a project tell to scholars or scientists who are interested in reviving something? Yeah, what is lost? How do we revive it? Is a document to be retrieved through harvest and production? What might we as historian, cultural practitioners, food lovers bring to this? And it is with this purpose that we sort of went on this adventure to create this video piece. Okay, most of this happened over Zoom, Google Meet, Facebook chats, facilitated, coordinated, supported by Siobhan and Duncan, who miraculously made all of this happen in the last 1 week. So I'm thankful to all those people. But let's return to the text and its performance. I want to start with Danish first, when he so we had a text, but we had to adapt it and create a script around it. It's a versified text. It's published for those who want to buy the wonderful miniatures and text. It's available at the Rampur Raza Library. Our English translation will be available in the month of July. But Danish Saab, if I may begin with you, you provided a wonderful, not just historical context in the script, but what I also thought was interesting was you brought in our conversation the centrality of food in the history of Urdu. So I want you to say a little bit more about this idea of Urdu beyond a literary archive to an archive of taste and sensibility.
Actually, for most of us, Urdu is just not a language. It is a culture. It is part of a very rich civilization, and it has linkages with the rest of the world, right from Persia to England to Central Asia. And what we call Urdu culture or Urdu Tehzeeb, it has beautiful ingredients and influences from around the world, and right from poetry to food to lifestyle There's so much convergence, and it was something very beautiful to retrieve and relive and revive the performance tradition which was there, in Rampur and elsewhere. And of course, Fauzia earlier also she wanted to do something for Rekhti Goi because she thought that using women's idiom, a feminine idiom, she may develop a better connect with the audiences. But most of the texts which are available, I told her, they will not suit, her style, the kind of storytelling she was doing. Of course, we were using, and Fauzia was using a lot of archival content because Dastan Goi itself, is a very old tradition, and people love the stylized language, the rhyming, the poetry, the poetic expression, and all those things. So the text you provided, everything was there actually, and we have also developed a style of our own while doing Dastane Mahabharat and Dastane Radha Krishna, Dastan Apne Ram Ji Ki, because we have been using a lot of poetry. So unlike other storytellers and Dastan Go, Fauzia has been using almost 50% poetry in her performances. So what you provided, it was 100% poetry. So the two styles matched beautifully, and we should be grateful and thankful to Sayoban and you particularly, and to Sheffield, because we were passing through very difficult times. During the first lockdown, it was a very dark and depressive period, and thanks to this text, we were doing rehearsals and we were feeling very fulfilled because we were creating something. And all the time we were expecting that we'll go to Rampur and in Delhi also, and we'll be doing this performance before live audience. When it could not happen, we created this video, and the performance has come so beautiful. I'm sure anyone seeing it can feel the beauty that used to be there in Jashn-e-Benazir, and the kind of food and the galaxy of artists and everything which was there. So the credit goes to you and to Sheffield University basically. Yes.
The credit always belongs to the artist who brings words into voice. So thank you for that. And thank you for doing this in a very difficult time, I may add. Arranging cameras, doing session in time that was very, very difficult. But I suppose crisis also brings creativity. So this video is an example of that. I want to have a follow-up question before I take it to Fauzia. So Urdu is often written as a sweet language, Shirin Zaban, bahut meethi zaban hai. But what I found interesting in this text was it gave us different flavors of words. It's tangy, it's spicy, it has a whole set of flavor of the language, and it uses those metaphors. My favorite being the buttermilk metaphor, and the metaphor of Zaban as Zamin to create yogurt-like tangy words. So I was wondering if you want to say something about how in some way in the popular culture, Urdu's how shall I put it? Multisensorial, various tastes of Urdu needs to be brought in. It is, of course, a language of great refinement, but it's also a subaltern language. It's also an aristocratic language. It's also a vulgar language. It's also a very refined language. And Rekhti, in that sense, provide us these multiple tastes of Urdu. Would you like to say something, because you have worked on variety of Urdu texts, about language flavor?
Yes. Actually, there's a particular line in the Fauzia's and Sania's performance lazzate kamo dahan, and lazzate zehn. So zaban ka chatkhara. When we say zaban ka chatkhara, so zaban is used for tasting food and flavors, and zaban here is a multi-layered thing. I mean, in no other language zaban is used in these two contexts. I mean, there might be some languages, but at least I don't know that language. And it is used for poetry, it is used for food also. So I mean that layer was already there, and like any other good language, Urdu has layers and shades, and it is used by women in a different way. Dagh was supposed to be speaking the or writing the language of the palace, महल की जो ज़बान थी, and when he was reciting a poem in Delhi, so somebody said that इनको क्या मालूम है, what he knows about the language, only the queens and the princes, they understand the language of the mahal. So if we take this into consideration, then rekhti refers to, or rekhti opens another word for us to understand and appreciate the culture, because women they carry culture forward. They they preserve the language, they pass on the language to the next generation, and they have a language of their own, which is almost a private language. In India, there's a language which is called Bamni. So Brahman women, I mean, of a particular region, they have a language of their own, which men, they don't understand most of it. So Rekhti provided us, I mean, that opportunity, and I'm sure in near future we'll be doing, getting, Q and impetus, and the task which you gave us was a catalyst. So we'll be doing more Rekhti Goi performances, because I mean we are also hooked to the beauty and the shades which it provides, because I mean this language is not being used properly. It is there in the books. Now women, they have a different expression. So I'm sure that with the help of Sanaya and Fauzia, I will be trying to revive Rekhti Goi in a serious way, because I mean you started it and we have to carry it forward now.
Well, that's a wonderful juncture to move to our female artists, Fauzia and Sanaya. It has been a pleasure. It has been a great learning experience to work with you. I want to start, Fauzia, with you by asking you a very obvious, but I think often unaddressed question. I want you to say a little bit of your experience of working as a dastango, a field that was heavily welcomed, heavily celebrated, and yet that moment of discovery of Urdu's vocal expression somehow did not immediately lead to a turn to Rekhti Goi. Why and how do you think that didn't happen? And what are your thoughts on that as a female performing artist? And Sanaya, you should also come on in at a later stage. Yes, go ahead.
ख्वातिन हज़रात आदाब, मैं इंग्लिश में नहीं बात करूंगी, मैं उर्दू में बात करूंगी और उसको ट्रांसलेट करेंगे दानिश इकबाल साहब। तो सबसे पहले तो मैं शुक्रिया अदा करना चाहती हूँ रज़ाक साहब का, सिबॉन का, कि उन्होंने हमें ये मौका दिया कि हम इस काम में उनका साथ दे पाए, सबसे पहले। और दूसरी बात ये कि मैं एक और चीज की, सनाया नाम नहीं है, सानिया है।
सानिया,
हाँ,
ओके।
तो रज़ाक साहब, जब फीमेल दास्तान गोई की बात होती है, मैं शुरू करती हूँ 2006 से, जब दास्तान गोई बिल्कुल रिवाइव हो रही थी और उस वक्त लोग जानते नहीं थे कि दास्तान गोई क्या है। हाँ, उस वक्त मैंने दास्तान गोई करने का सोचा था। अभी तो काफी लोग जानते हैं कि दास्तान गोई क्या है और काफी लोग इससे मेस्मराइज हो जाते हैं, काफी लोगों को लगता है कि बड़ा ही फ्लेवर वाला काम है, लेकिन उस वक्त ऐसा कुछ भी नहीं था, इवन परफॉर्मेंसेस भी नहीं होती थी। तो ये मेरा इश्क था जो दास्तान गोई की तरफ मुझे लेकर आया था जब मैंने दास्तान गोई की पहली परफॉर्मेंस देखी थी। और बीइंग अ फीमेल दास्तान गो जो मेरी जर्नी रही है, मैं उसे काफी कैटेगरीज में बांटती हूँ। सबसे पहली कैटेगरी में मैं ये कहती हूँ कि मुझे परफॉर्मेंस करने के लिए ही मना नहीं किया जाता था, बल्कि मैं कहीं परफॉर्म ना करूं उसके लिए ईमेल्स लिखे जाते थे और उसके लिए फेसबुक पोस्ट लिखे जाते थे। और सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट बात ये थी कि वो लोग ये काम कर रहे थे जो कि या कर रहे हैं अभी भी, जो दास्तान गोई में जिनका बहुत बड़ा नाम है, जो बहुत फेमस हैं, ये फीमेल दास्तान गो कहाँ से आ गई है। और मतलब एंड द सेकंड कैटेगरी में मानती हूँ बैकग्राउंड को लेकर, क्योंकि जो भी ये लिटरेरी सर्किल है उर्दू का, उसमें काफी बड़े बड़े नाम हैं, तो मेरे पीछे ना कोई नाम नहीं है, मेरे पीछे कोई ऐसी चीज नहीं है कि मैं किसी बड़े उर्दू प्रोफेसर की बेटी हूँ या मैं किसी बहुत लिटरेरी सर्कल से आती हूँ। टू बी वेरी ऑनेस्ट, मेरे फादर स्कूटर मैकेनिक हैं, मैं एक गवर्नमेंट सरकारी स्कूल से पढ़ी हूँ और मैं उर्दू मीडियम से पढ़ी हूँ, और उर्दू मेरा इश्क है और उसी इश्क को मैं काम में लाई हूँ। मैं लेक्चरर थी, पढ़ाती थी, मैंने अपनी नौकरी क्विट करके वापस में इसको मैंने अपने पैशन को प्रोफेशन बनाया। तो वो जो ह्यूमिलेशन है ना, जो आपकी क्लास को लेकर होता है, जो आपके बैकग्राउंड को लेकर होता है, वो आज तक मैंने सहा है। वो मतलब मैं उससे आज भी लड़ रही हूँ और उससे मैं फाइट कर रही हूँ लगातार। और जितनी भी, और सिर्फ पेट्रियार्टिकल जो सोसाइटी है वो सिर्फ मर्दों को नहीं कहूंगी, काफी बार औरतें भी ऐसी होती हैं जो ये कहती हैं ये काम तुम नहीं कर सकती, या ये काम तुम क्यों कर रही हो, या काफी जो मर्द हैं जो उनको लगता है कि हमारी औरतें ये काम करेंगी क्योंकि हमारी औरतें उस बैकग्राउंड से आती हैं, क्योंकि हम उन्हें इस काम में ला रहे हैं। तो ये कुछ कैटेगरीज हैं। लेकिन वहीं पर एक शख्स आते हैं मेरे साथ, जब मैं स्ट्रगल कर रही थी, जब मैंने अपने पाँव पे खड़ा होना शुरू किया 2014 में परफॉर्म कर रही थी, लेकिन जब मैंने अलग से अपना काम शुरू किया, जब लोग अगेंस्ट थे, वहां पर एक शख्स आते हैं जनाब दानिश इकबाल साहब, और वो मेल है और वो मेरा साथ इस तरह से निभाते हैं कि वो मुझे डायरेक्ट करते हैं, वो मेरी स्क्रिप्ट्स लिखते हैं और मेरी बात बहुत पेशेंट, बहुत सब्र के साथ सुनते हैं, और जो मैं कहती हूँ एग्जैक्टली वो उसको कागज पे उतारते हैं और इतनी ब्यूटीफुली उतारते हैं कि मैं बता नहीं सकती। और कभी, और आजकल तो उनको मुझसे ये शिकायत भी रहती है, भाई तुम्हें तो कुछ पसंद ही नहीं आता। तो मैं कहती हूँ मैं आप ही की बिगाड़ी हुई लड़की हूँ, क्योंकि आप ही ने बिगाड़ा है, आप ही ने इतना अच्छा लिखते हैं कि अब मुझे अगर मतलब मुझे उसमें लगता है कि नहीं सर और अच्छा और अच्छा और अच्छा। तो एक तो ये बात है। दूसरी बात यह है कि मैंने मुझे हमेशा से ही काफी रेखती गोई, मुझे जैसे दानिश सर ने कहा, हमारी कई बार बात हो चुकी थी रज़ाक साहब की, मुझे बड़ा मजा आता था वो पढ़ने में, लेकिन कहीं वो उस तरह की शायरी होती थी कि मतलब दानिश इकबाल सर और हम दोनों को ये था, एक एप्रीहेंशन था कि ये मतलब करना चाहिए कि नहीं करना चाहिए। लेकिन क्योंकि ये मर्द, जितना मैंने पढ़ा है, ये मर्द करते थे और वो दुपट्टा ओढ़ के परफॉर्म करते थे और ये सब था। फिर आप आए और अचानक से एक मैसेंजर पे, फेसबुक पे मुझे एक मैसेज आया और हमारी वहां से बातचीत शुरू हुई और वहां से हमने बातचीत करना शुरू करी और आपने कहा ये करोगे। तो मुझे ऐसा लगा कि जैसे कि ये यूनिवर्स ने मुझे आपको भेजा है मेरे लिए, क्योंकि दानिश इकबाल सर और मैं, हम ऑलरेडी कुछ प्लान कर रहे थे और आपने वहां आके बेसिकली उसको मटेरियलाइज करा दिया, और इतनी खूबसूरत तरीके से आपने उसको मटेरियलाइज कराया है कि वही दानिश सर और मैंने जो कहा है कि हम इसको अब आगे लेके जाएंगे, लेकिन इसका क्रेडिट हमेशा आपको ही जाएगा क्योंकि आपकी वजह से ये शुरुआत हुई है। तो ये अगर मैं आपकी सवाल का जवाब दे पाई हूँ तो।
Okay. For brevity of time, we'll have to have small responses because there are more questions coming.
Of course.
But,
actually, I wanted to interrupt Fawzia because I was thinking that, if she goes on speaking, for too long, then I'll miss, so many points, so many very important points which raised. So I'll provide a gist that, Fawzia says that she fell in love with the Dastan Goi, the art of Dastan Goi, and left her career as a teacher, as a lecturer, and struggled a lot, and she had to create a space which was basically a male preserve in those days. And throughout history there's no reference of any other Dastan Go who was a female and who managed to perform because women were not, they were under parda, and only certain women they used to perform, and the performance used to be music and dance only, and a lot of baggage was there. So she had to struggle a lot, and finally carve out a niche, in the patriarchal setup, and she had to struggle against not only patriarchy but against class consciousness. And in India, education is also preserve of certain families, and I mean, like any other place, I mean, there are people, I mean, who frown upon outsiders in their area, and right from literature to performance, traditions. In India, there are so many gharanas. Like in music, we have so many gharanas. So in India, in literature also, we have gharanas. And we have, I'm sorry to use this word, we have a literary mafia also, that, if you are practicing, any writing Urdu poetry or literature, you have to be in either of the two big camps, and they behave in strange ways. So Fauzia was nowhere. She was neither in the progressive setup nor in the modernist setup, and so she had to struggle a lot. And she was being opposed by so-called other performers, and they used to write mails against her performances. So it was a big struggle, and she wanted to experiment with Rekhti Goi also. And fortunately, Sheffield University, Razak Saab and Sahaban, and they provided this beautiful opportunity, and she grabbed it. And I think, she's enjoying it. Yes.
Good.
Although, I could not do much justice to what all she said, but that is the gist, as you said.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Would you like to say a few words in this?
मुझसे कह रहे हैं आप?
जी नहीं, आपके साथ जो है जिनका नाम मैं गलत बोल रहा हूँ, Tanya, would you quickly say your experience in this? We have a series of questions, so I'm sorry to be brief here, but we should collect the questions for you. But please go ahead and say your thoughts on the Rekhti Goi women idiom, and if you can say something about what women perspective bring both to the literary but also the archive of food and sensibility.
Of course. So I'd like to begin with a big thanks to for giving us an opportunity to perform this, because as it is mentioned in the poem, sunne mein sahel, kehne mein dushwar naam hai. It's actually difficult, and these were the poets who were writing, what could be called the male tradition of poetry, and then on the other hand they were doing this, and which was performative poetry. Even in the Rekhti Goi, you see that how he would perform. He would take his dupatta and then wear it and then perform this. So this is absolutely a performative art, and as has been said by Danish Sahab, that there's of course a tendency to judge it as sometimes shameful, sometimes as not good enough, sometimes as non-literary, only because it was the language of women. It has women idioms, but we often forget that language is women's domain. So Fauzia and I, we have also done, we used to do, little, not exactly Rekhti Goi, but small performances on Begmati Zaban. That's also, a research area that I'm working on. And we had amazing experiences out of the audiences there who would come and say that, of course, we never knew that this was something that men were not allowed to speak. And this was absolutely a subaltern in more ways than one language. So based on that, we realized, and if you will just look at it, you'll also realize that most of our idioms, they actually come from the kitchen. Yeah. And men were not supposed to speak these idioms because they were part of women's vocabulary. So all our idioms from kitchen, ye muo or masoor ki dal, thotha chana, baje ghana, just see the rhythm. It's fluid, just like the language in the poem. It's flexible. It's dadan. It's beautiful, and the chatkara that is there. It's sweet. It's tangy, much like the food itself. So we often forget that men were not supposed to work in the kitchen. It were the women who were generating this language through their own experiences. They were not literate. They would not have written it. And I'm still looking for someone to tell me if there's any book or if there's any musaddas or any other form of poetry in Urdu which is written by women, in Refti, but men were doing all this. So I think it's a right time to take questions because I can go on and on talking about this. Thank you again.
Yeah, I just want to say there was a reason I approached Fawzia, because Fawzia brings a certain subaltern sensibility which actually is necessary for Urdu. Urdu is not an elite language, although people want to turn it to one. It has subaltern origins. And I had seen Fawzia, those who have not seen, she has another video on Karkhandari Zaban, which is wonderful because she brings her own lived experience to this. And there's a reason we wanted to do this piece with women artists, female artists, because we felt that there was this opportunity that the piece that is traditionally dominated by men, which is of women's lived experience, should be done by a female artist. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for bringing this relationship between female languages, but also knowledges, which is important to us. Talking of knowledges, we have a question from Duncan, I'm told. So Duncan, if you want to ask a question, go ahead.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And yeah, what an amazing hour and a half. I'm absolutely blown away by what I've just experienced. So thank you so much for all of you in putting this together. It was, yeah, truly phenomenal stuff. So I've got a few questions that have come in from the audience via Twitter and via our website. And I'm looking at the time, but I think we can, well, I'm in charge, so we're gonna indulge ourselves with a little bit more time, if that's all right, at least so we can get through some of these questions. So I think the first question that I'm gonna ask and use my privilege as the chair is something that I actually find quite personal, and I know we've had conversations, Siobhan and Tarana, about this. So the question is, combining the different sources that you've used today shows how some of the subtleties of taste, texture, aroma, etc., are hard to capture in words. I think that's absolutely true. Does this pose a challenge then for historical and archival research? I don't know who wants to. Whoever wants to pick that up.
You want to maybe read some more questions if there are more, and then people can pick up whoever wants to.
Well, I think we'll go through them one at a time, and then whoever wants to contribute can contribute. So maybe Siobhan wants to jump in on that one.
Yeah, Siobhan and
well,
Tarana.
Actually, I was going to. I wanted to invite you, Tarana, because you have the experience of working in the archives in Rampur, and you'll be familiar with the sources you've been using. And we've seen from Razak's case too the fact that we have this mixture of imagery and also text. So it'll be interesting to hear your reflections on that.
Yeah, so thank you so much. You see, with the archives, the actual idea of taste memory is not there so much, except maybe in pieces like Jashn-e-Benazir, where you have a lot of descriptive words about kheer and about kebab and all of that. Generally, what has happened in Rampur is that the historical work is very, it doesn't have so much of references of tastes and textures. And we have to often turn to oral memory, which has, or memoirs like Jahan Ara Habibullah's work, in which she has written about tastes, or Princess Mehrun-Nisa's work, in which she's written about how the food on the table evolved from the time of Nawab Hamid Ali Khan to Nawab Raza Ali Khan. So these are the main texts that we can rely on. And very often we have little snippets here and there where you can catch on, like a little bit. Even the cookbooks are very, very bland, and they don't have that so much of a texture, and they don't tell you what a thing looks like. Like we had the Khwan-e-Nemat or late 19th century archives. They never tell you what it tastes like, or what it looks like, or is it what is the aroma? So we have to rely a lot on these oral memories, which are intergenerational now. People still have memories of forgotten foods that we don't cook anymore. People still can tell me, but such people are very soon, they won't be around anymore, They won't be around to tell me what a dare bahisht was, and because we haven't eaten it in our lifetime, and probably our grandparents had it. So they would, they're no longer going to be around to tell us. So that's the case with the taste and the textures. Unfortunately, for some reason, it wasn't considered worthy of writing, except maybe at the time of Begum Jahan Ara Habibullah, because she found that things were passing away in the 1970s. And then they started writing about it, because already in their lifetime, that amnesia was happening, that taste amnesia was happening, and they wanted to capture it. It was the end of the princely era. The privy purses were over in 1971. The lifestyle was changing, and a lot of things were going away, and they just wanted to write it. Before that, they didn't have that sense of, noting it down, because what they had was just around. Just people spoke about it, like Begmati Zaban. Who cares about Begmati Zaban? It's just the lingo of the women sitting at home. But wasn't it so important? Wasn't the expression so important? Wasn't the feeling so important? So whatever has come down intergenerational, that's where the oral history comes in, and that's where we have to work harder and delve harder into the idea of forgotten food and bring it forth. Thank you.
I know we've got lots of other questions here, but I just wanted to jump in as well. One of the main focuses of this foci, I should say, of this project is this notion of culinary memory. And I think we're trying to capture that in a lot of different ways, partly through these kind of literary texts that we've talked about today, also through autobiography and memoir, as Tarana was just saying. In my own work too, I use a lot of travel narratives, and those can be very useful, I think, in kind of trying to capture some of that taste and texture that we came across in the question, because often then that is an occasion when people are in a position where they want to compare, and they do evoke the tastes and textures of home in comparison with the other. So I think there's a lot of kind of digging around. We've also got a very extensive oral history element to this project, and some fascinating material coming out of the interviews that one of our collaborators, Farah Yamin, has been doing in Delhi as well. So we're having to be creative about it to recapture that from the historical record. But I think through these various avenues, the kind of they're creating these kind of food pictures and tastes out of text.
Yeah, I think that notion of time running out is a really powerful one, isn't it? And I'm really excited about the way that hopefully we can address that and capture those amazing oral histories. So the next question that I guess follows on from that, which I think is a really interesting one. The questions ask, what do you think about the recreation or reinterpretation of food recipes? And the second part of the question is, how does this contribute to the understanding of the notion of authenticity in the context of cuisines? I think that's a really interesting pair of questions. So who wants to have a go at that?
Could we go to you, Sarah, first, and then perhaps Tarana, because you very consciously chose to cook a 12th century recipe and to recreate it in a kind of modern context. So maybe you could start.
I will start with the second question first, and then I'll come to the first question.
Okay.
Second question about the authenticity of the food. As someone who loves food, I don't think there's anything as authentic food. The essence can be the same, but it can't be. So let's say, for example, the khichdi that Rana made, or the kheer that I made, right? Can we call that authentic? No. Because, and I mean, it's a big thing, and I'm sorry for saying it. The reason I'm saying no, we can't call it authentic, because it's not the same thing that we have used. For example, maybe the kheer, the khichdi, the biryani, the nihalis, and the hormas, the first time ever when it was made on a wood fire or a coal. The mustard oil, the ghee, the olive oil, whatever kind of oil that was used was a little different, right? The environment it was made was different. And the person who made, that's what was authentic, so to speak, or the original. I put a lot of these recipes as the traditional recipes. So can kheer, can khichdi, biryani, tahiri, etc. be called as traditional recipes? Yes. And hence there is nothing called authentic food. And food is like language. It is ever evolving. It cannot and it must not stop just at once. And that is why we need to come up with our own interpretation using the same traditional methods or traditional ways of cooking to exactly what both of you were saying about, or actually all of you were talking about the oral history, right? To preserve those things that has happened in the past. And the reason we want to bring a lot of those things back, and we're not focusing on everything, but we're focusing on a lot of things which were good in that era. And that's why we want them to be back in our life, and because they added more value. So for example, it could be a chutney, which was made on silbatta, or an earthen or stone grind versus a mixer grinder, right? We want to bring back the silbatta, even though it is a lot more labor intensive. So that is my sense on recreating a lot of things, still remaining true to the essence of it. So, and that's why when I said in Indian food you have cardamom versus European, which is vanilla. Can you add vanilla in kheer? Sure, you can. You're just tweaking it. You're just giving your version, still remaining the purest or traditionalist way of cooking.
Thank you, Sadaf. Taurana, did you want to jump in as well?
Yes, so I think I would tackle the first question first about recreating the recipe from old cookbooks. So these cookbooks that I have been cooking with belong to late 19th century. And a lot of these recipes were, of course, there were variations of, let us say, like you said, pulaus, were so many variations of pulaus were there. Some were Mughal, borrowed from the Mughal cuisine. Some were borrowed from Kashmiri cuisine or Awadhi cuisine, and all of it together. So now the idea of recreating it involved the same ingredients. The ingredients were very much there. You had cinnamon, you had elaichi, you had cardamom. No, the ingredients are very much there. But mostly I felt that taking the basic ingredients, it was the complexity of methodology that we had abridged, while we went along, because as Sadaf said, things were so labor intensive. In a pulao, you actually needed 3 different processes. The first thing I cooked was a pulao from these Persian recipes, and that I've written a whole article on it because it was so tough. 3 different processes. Would I do it? No, I would just make the stock and just cook the rice, So we abbreviated it and we compromised on the taste, right? So I wanted to get back the taste without making it so tough. So there were little subtexts that we overlooked. Like there was a certain marination that went into it. There was some addition of, let us say, fennel seeds into the pulao, which never existed earlier, but maybe some time, people realized that, okay, we like the aroma of fennel seeds as well. So we just changed that, right? So, things because you see, recipes or cooking is a continuum. In India, definitely, we see recipes coming from the Mughals, being copied and recopied and carried on and changed. And so I would, you can write papers on what is authentic and what is heritage. Is there a heritage Rampuri cuisine? Is there a heritage Awadhi cuisine? I think we are dealing with an amalgamation of processes and sub-processes of chefs and khansamas, at least in case of Rampur, the khansamas coming together and deciding what was working with what, because they wanted to be rewarded for something new, right? So then kheer becomes gulathi in Rampur and it has a different twist. You see, so well, let's not talk about authentic or heritage, because I would not really get into that very huge debate. But yes, in this project, very significantly, we have been recreating these recipes, trying to make them modern and have that same taste. At the same time, also extremely important part of the project is training the chefs in these new old recipes, increasing the repertoire so that they can be more employable also, so that they just don't have one biryani and one pulao, but they have 5-6 pulaos and 5-6 biryanis to cook when they go out and search for work. So, well, that's I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
I think we've had some really fascinating answers there that really point, don't they, to so many important historical processes that are behind the kind of changing food cultures that we're talking about. So, a lot of references there to the intensity of labor, which of course points to changing gender relations, changing technologies, and also changing domestic architecture as well, as people have moved into cities through urbanization and all of those things. So, all of that is kind of supporting the stories you're telling, isn't it? Duncan, shall we go back to you? Do you have any more questions for us?
I have two more. So I think the first one is for Razak, actually, and it's from someone called Pasha Khan, I think, who says, when researching for my book, The Broken Spell, I was unable to find named females. Female, is it Dastango? Dastangos? And they wonder if Razak knows more about them. She'd love to find out.
Well, Pasha is authority on the Dastan tradition, and I'm sure he's mined all the manuscript possible, but he keeps asking me about more. I haven't come across, but that might simply be a question of archive. There's another text written on Justin Bay Nazir. The point would be not to look for empirical evidences. It's quite unlikely that a popular tradition like Dastango was not imitated. Look at Fauzia's life narrative herself. She saw it, she liked it, as she said, she fell in love, and she just did it. I'm pretty sure it was there. The question is of the archive. It's about the method and length that we bring to our archive. I, for example, thought that this text was more important than doing other stuff, although this was not recognized as an important text. Therefore, I'm thankful to my translator friend Shad that, we took a risk, but I just felt that, this text brings a different sensibility. It has example of some of the things that have not been written about. So it would be not to go look forward, what you were asking, Duncan. It is about creating the overall texture of time, not looking for data. So I would imagine that I'm sure the task would be to think about how do we write about it. There are examples of only female mehfils written by some of the women from the Zanana. I've recently discovered a text about birthday celebration parties in Bhopal. Siobhan can talk about it. I'm sure in those female-only spaces, women experimented with this. The task would be, how do we bring those stories into fore? They won't be in the canon. The canon doesn't write about it, which is why I think a text like this is important. It's not that it's so rare. The point is it will bring a different texture to this thing. What was said, that the women language is also women knowledge. They bring a certain metaphor to language, which gives you a texture of time and flavor. Okay, that's a long winding answer to Pasha's direct question. Pasha, I'll keep an eye. You should visit Rampur though.
No,
yes, most welcome. We would love to host you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the very complete answer. I'm going to say it was a complete answer. That was great. And so the last question isn't really a question, but it's a comment that I think might initiate some discussion. So I think it's probably worth finishing on this one. which is a comment that the understanding of the kitchen solely as the women's domain is apparently a modern day phenomena. So I was intrigued to see what the panel thought about that. So,
Tarana, I know you've been writing about this recently for your paper on Rampur, and you were talking particularly in that about the kitchen as a male domain. Yeah.
Yeah, so what actually happened, especially in Rampur, was that at least the royal kitchens and the kitchens of the elites were a male domain because, the Khansamas and the lady of the house, there was a parda. So the women couldn't, the royal women especially couldn't be seen in the kitchens. And so there was a distance, a little go in between. And maybe the other thing that I realized was that Zananas had their own kitchens also, because suppose the lady or the begum wanted to have khichdi that day and she didn't want any of the kormas, that was the usual khasa fare that was coming in Nashtidan to her rooms. Every day the women were served food from the royal kitchens, which was really elaborate, and she just wanted khichdi that day. So she would be cooking. Now, what I saw in Princess Mehrun Nisa's memoir was that she went to her mother, her biological mother in the Zanana, and the biological mother loved to cook for her. And she was allowed to eat with her hands, and she didn't have to use forks and spoons like she had to use when she was dining with her governess or with the Nawab, etc. So she just loved that. So they definitely had, and then I discovered the kitchens over there in the Zanana, the old Zanana. So it was a female, like the main kitchens were ruled by the Khansamas, but somewhere along the way, the veil was broken in the 1930s. The women came out of the veil. Nawab Raza Ali Khan's wife came out of the parda, and her family members came out of the parda. And so, there was more of an interaction between the male Khansamas and the women. And, a sort of a different kind of a domination now existed. So I feel that, the changing texture, the changing voices in the kitchen is in itself a study. Who was there in the kitchen? Who was dominating? Who was setting the menu? Who was indicating what taste had to be carried? Was it the Nawab? Was it the Begum? So that in itself is a fascinating study, and which is really not written about. Again, we infer. Again, we go back to the royal archives. Who was doing what? Who was where? Placed where?
It's just wonderful to have insight.
I hope that answers.
Sorry, I'll just jump in and then I'll go over to you, Razak. Just important to recognize here that, of course, Farhana is talking about a very elite context, talking about the royal palaces of Rampur.
I'm talking about the palaces, not the
gender relations in that context. And what will be interesting, I think, in the context of our project, particularly as we analyze the oral history data from other different strands, social groups within society, will be to look at those changing gender relations over time. Razak, you wanted to speak to?
Yeah, I just want to do a bridge work here. In the text, I think the idea of the kitchen as a space itself is a very bourgeois idea, that this is this separated, created domain. You don't have that sense if you think of the wider economy of the kitchen. So in this text, for example, the vegetable sellers, the pot makers, what is the economy of kitchen? This idea of turning it into some kind of Victorian gendered subjective space, I think is deceptive, because it doesn't let you see that the Indian kitchen is the most political and important space. So many actors are coming and are part of it. Duncan, when you were also raising the question about texture of time, when we write about food, we have to also write about utensils. We have to write about the technology of the kitchen, who is bringing fireworks, what kind of foods are being created. And as Rana was saying, cooking food back then was labor intensive. It was a big labor field. So that whole set of other economy of the material and the other sort of fuel of the kitchen is another way to sort of get back to that. And if I can take a liberty here and bring back the artist, maybe it is a time where, perhaps Fauzia, they can recite something about women, or, whichever section they want, about the characters of the bazaar who were women, who were connected with the economy of food. So that with the audience, at least get one live version of it. If you would be so kind, Fauzia, to maybe recite a line for us and our audience.
Rosie, I think you'll just need to take off your mic. Yeah.
ओके तो हम एक लास्ट पोर्शन है जो हम जरूर चाहेंगे कि हम ऑडियंस के सामने लाइव परफॉर्म करें, क्योंकि उसमें वीडियो में थोड़ा दिक्कत थी हमारे। तो ख्वातीन हजरात, पेश है रेख्ती गोई।
हलवाइयों की बालों की कसरत है जा बजा,
दुकान ए भी खुरमा है लख पेड़ से सवा,
हलवाई पूरी बात भला करने पाए क्या,
ये बर्फी जान हो जहां गाहक हजार हा, ऐसा ना होगा मिस्र का बाजार उई गर्म,
मिस्री ने बात पूछ की आती है मुझको शर्म,
शीरी अदा मिठाई कहीं लेते हैं खड़े,
फरहाद अमिर चिड़े आशिक भी हैं अड़े,
गुपचुप है डोरे नशे के आंखों में है पड़े,
लड्डू की तरह सैकड़ों हैं छोटे और बड़े,
दिल रखने की जगह नहीं हर सू पुकार है,
रेवड़ी के गोया फेर में दुकानदार है,
रेवड़ी के गोया फेर में दुकानदार है।
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. And what a way to end a really marvellous afternoon. I just want to thank Siobhan, Tarana and the team for putting this together at such short notice. It was truly brilliant, eye-opening, and I've had a blast. So I'm sure the rest of our audience will have done too. So thank you so much. And please don't forget, we have one final event for Planet to Plate, which will be starting at 6 p.m. With our good friend Gareth Roberts from the local food co-op Regather, talking about his vision for a values-based food system and how we might try that out in Sheffield. So, right, you're a tough act to follow, but if there's anyone that can rise to the challenge, I know Gareth can. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and thank you very much.